Recording in progress.
Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us in this press conference co-organized by the CBD Women's Caucus and IIED, International Institute for Environment and Development. I am Amelia Arreguin. My pleasure to be the moderator for this session. And today we are looking into a critical topic that is actually being discussed as we speak in the negotiations of the subsidiary body of implementation, number 6, for the CBD, about what are the role of women's organizations in producing, in using gender diversity data, and what is also the responsibility or the role of different actors in producing and using such data. So it is our pleasure to welcome this amazing panel of speakers that each of them are leaders and authorities in the field. We will be listening from different contexts, different perspectives. So the dynamic for this press conference is that we are going to invite each of them to present a bit of their work, a bit of reflections, key messages that they want to highlight regarding gender and biodiversity data, as this is a relevant gap that has to be addressed. So let us start. My pleasure to introduce to you my colleague, Shruti Ajit, Project Officer for the CBD Women's Caucus, who is actually guide us on the context of this project and the press conference.
Thank you, Amelia, and I'm truly honored to be part of this wonderful, wonderful panel. We have some of the best in this space on gender and biodiversity data, and I look forward to seeing what each one of you have to say. It's also a privilege to share these key messages from our recent assessment on the gender-responsive biodiversity data. This research was in collaboration with IIED, designed to understand how women-led and community-based organizations are engaging with biodiversity data, what barriers they face, and what is needed to ensure their evidence meaningfully informs policy processes. So let me begin with the most important finding, which is that women-led and community-based organizations are already producing gender-responsive biodiversity data. And they are doing so across the entire data value chain of aspects of generation, collection, use, communication, and analysis. And I can throw, I can show some of the data, concrete numbers, is that our survey shows that 77 are actively engaged in data communication, 70% in data use, 61% in data collection, and 56% in data analysis. So this kind of shows that this is not peripheral participation. This is substantive, decision-relevant engagement. And women-led organizations are not merely beneficiaries of biodiversity policies. They are data producers, analysts, communicators, and knowledge holders. Second, one of the greatest strengths of this data is that it's deeply community-rooted. Community members and women leaders play a prominent role, with 57% of them engaged in data collection, about 43% are engaged in data use, and another 43% in data validation. So this reflects something critical, that gender-responsive biodiversity evidence is grounded in lived experiences, local leadership, and traditional knowledge systems. And this shapes the type of data being generated, which is the qualitative and narrative-based methods dominate much of the women-led biodiversity data practices, including storytelling, interviews, testimonials, community observation, and field documentation. This is not a weakness, it's a strength. These approaches are uniquely capable of capturing the gender dimensions of biodiversity change that standard ecological indicators often miss. Our findings also show that organizations collect overlapping and integrated data types, with 86% collecting on gender and social inclusion data, the similar 67% on socioeconomic data, 61% of them also looking at policy and legal data, 56% on biodiversity and ecological data, and 57% on traditional knowledge. This integrated approach reflects the lived reality that biodiversity and governance and social justice are interconnected. However, the assessment also reveals significant structural barriers. It says that 86% of respondents identified limited funding as a primary challenge. This funding gap is directly linked to lack of access to digital tool and technology, about 56% of it. About 47% of the respondents said that they also have limited technical skills in data collection. And another 51% said that they have foundational gaps in data management and digital literacy. So importantly, organizations made clear that training alone is insufficient. Without infrastructure, equipments, and sustained financing, new skills cannot be applied. Capacity strengthening must be resourced, not symbolic. But perhaps the most important finding is this, that the primary obstacle to policy impact is not the lack of evidence. It is the lack of recognition, access, and credibility. Community-generated and women-led data is often undervalued in formal decision-making spaces, including within the NBSAP processes and other multilateral processes in the CBD. As parties implement this global biodiversity framework, including Target 23 and on gender equality, as we saw yesterday in the discussion on GPA, monitoring and reporting systems, as we saw in the discussion on GPA yesterday, monitoring and reporting systems must evolve to recognize diverse forms of evidence. Otherwise, we risk institutionalizing exclusion within our data systems. Finally, the assessment reveals something very, very encouraging. So that's the last part, which is that 96% of our respondents expressed interest in peer-to-peer learning exchanges. This signals extraordinary readiness for collective capacity strengthening. It also suggests that scalable network-based approaches could significantly strengthen gender-responsive biodiversity data systems across regions. So what does this mean for policy? It means that implementation of the global biodiversity framework cannot rely solely on top-down data architectures. It means that financing mechanisms must directly support women-led data systems. It means that reporting modalities must create accessible pathways for women-led and community-generated evidence to inform NBSAPs. It also means that legitimacy must be expanded to recognize that narrative, qualitative, and traditional knowledge systems are not supplementary to biodiversity governance, they are foundational to it. Let me close with this. The evidence exists, the leadership exists, the readiness exists. What is required now is structural recognition, resourcing, and integration. If we are serious about transformative implementation, gender-responsive biodiversity data must move from the margins to the center of biodiversity governance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for highlighting these key messages from the, actually today is the soft launch of this report. So my colleague Roxana will help us to perhaps hand over some of the QR codes so you start downloading, sharing it around. Because this is, as mentioned, a collaboration with IIED, and we are looking into the long term. But in this landscape of gender and biodiversity data, there's other two key actors. Well, there are many key actors, but we have here in the table one of our favorite centers that are also joining this collaboration. And, but they also have a long long-standing work on the intersection. So they will be sharing with us my colleague Ceire Booth, Program Officer at the Policy Innovation Area from UNEP-WCMC. She will be sharing with us about the Gender Plan of Action Indicator, right? Like in the CBD, this is not a new topic, it's a topic that has been worked, and she will be sharing with us what has been done so far with this indicator and encouraging us to use it. So over to you, Ceire.
Thank you, Amelia, and nice to have you all here in the room. So just for a bit of background, UNEP-WCMC, which is UNEP's World Conservation Monitoring Centre, has a history, like Amelia said, of working with parties and with local organisations who are custodians of information and data to support monitoring at the national level in a way that helps us to track progress on Section C relating to rights-based implementation, gender-responsive implementation, intergenerational equity, and so on. I'm going to speak specifically about one of the indicator tools that is available for monitoring implementation of the Gender Plan of Action. So this is a component indicator that was adopted in Decision 1631 on the monitoring framework that is directly relevant to monitoring Target 23, but also supports monitoring of Target 22 also. So you might know that the Gender Plan of Action contains 18 indicative actions for which parties are the lead responsible actor. So when we were developing this indicator methodology, what we did is we translated those 18 indicative actions into 18 survey questions with optional answers in a binary format so that parties can go through the list of survey answers and select whether they have implemented that action fully, partially, or not yet. The indicator has a really simple accompanying calculation tool, and the idea with the tool is that when parties are filling out the survey, they can enter their answers into this simple Excel, and it calculates a numerical value across each of the indicative actions and across the 3 expected outcomes of the Gender Plan of Action. So when we were developing this draft methodology, we got a lot of feedback and input from parties to help improve the usefulness of this indicator for monitoring at the national level. We had input through a peer review process through 19 parties, 1 major group, and 8 observer organisations. And the major benefits that I want to emphasise of this component indicator is that it can help parties to monitor their progress over time and to see which indicative actions they are advancing well on, and identify priority indicative actions that they might want to focus on in future. It also supports reporting towards the Global Binary Indicator 23B, and essentially what's really critical is that it provides a full comprehensive measure of progress across all aspects of the Gender Plan of Action for which parties are the lead responsible actor, and therefore a really comprehensive measure of progress against Target 23. Thanks, and if you would like any more information on it, please feel free to grab me at any point over the next few days.
Thank you so much, Ceire. And just to say that you can see that there are these 2 exercises ongoing, and that both of them are already giving us, like a narrative here. They are telling us evident reality. That as I want to pick one of the messages that Shruti highlighted, right? Their readiness. Like, women's organizations are already interested. The institutions, the centers are already interested working on it. There are parties interested, yet we have a couple of barriers that if we collaborate together, I'm really sure we can tackle it. It's just perhaps, and maybe that's the question, what is holding us back if we have all of this? So just to add a bit more into this puzzle of information, let us bring now the perspective of, it's not just the CBD. Like gender and biodiversity data, it's sits within a context of environment and gender data, right? So we are inviting now our colleague Benge Nirongo from UN Women. He's an intergovernmental specialist covering the 3 Rio Conventions, and he will exactly speak into that, the gender data in building synergies across the Rio Convention. So maybe he has an answer to us.
I hope I have an answer to that, Amelia. But first of all, let me thank the Women's Caucus and IIED for convening this very timely press conference, and also to congratulate the 2 entities for the excellent work done in doing the research and, of course, publishing the policy brief that we're about to see today. As parties and ourselves are here at SBI-6 to shape the implementation of the KMGBF, we're reminded that data is not just a technical issue, it's a political one, because what gets counted determines whose knowledge is valued, whose contributions are visible, and whose rights and priorities shape global environmental action. So across the Rio Conventions, we're witnessing an unprecedented opportunity to build synergies grounded in gender-responsive, community-generated, and human rights-based data systems. UN Women's recent paper on advancing gender-responsive synergies across the Rio Conventions does call precisely for coordinated approaches to gender and environment data across climate, biodiversity, and desertification regimes, and for strengthening all 10 dimensions that we identify in the paper of integrated gender environmental analysis. And that ranges from climate impacts on care work to financing, human rights, and women environmental human rights defenders. The list goes on. These dimensions provide a shared analytical foundation for the Rio Conventions, one capable of revealing common structural drivers of inequality, as well as shared entry points for policy coherence. Between the years 2023 and 2025, UN Women's Women Count program produced a series of gender and environment data briefs that used administrative, household, and community-based observation systems to assess gendered impacts across climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation. The briefs reveal a consistent pattern that environmental degradation tends to reinforce pre-existing gender inequalities, particularly by intensifying unpaid care work, increasing livelihood precarity, and heightening exposure to climate and ecological risks. The alignment between this work and the COP28 Global Pre-Conference's call to action on gender and environment data, which we developed jointly with partners including the IIED, underscores the growing convergence across global processes on the urgency of better data, better methods, but also better partnerships. So today's policy brief that we're going to see from the Women's Caucus and IIED does provide further evidence of why these synergies matter. The assessment of the 70 women-led organizations across 33 countries, as Shruti had mentioned earlier, demonstrates that women's organizations are already generating biodiversity-relevant data across the entire data value chain, drawing on qualitative, narrative, and indigenous knowledge methods that capture lived experience, often invisible in official indicators and statistics. Yet this evidence remains undervalued and under-resourced, with limited funding, insufficient digital tools, weak data management systems, and persistent barriers to recognition forming the main constraints that we observe. These findings echo what we see across the Rio Conventions, in that the obstacle is not the absence of evidence, but absence of recognition, visibility, and political uptake. And the GPA under the UNCBD, especially in the lead up to its midterm review, makes clear that gender-responsive monitoring, reporting, and review are essential to effective KMGBF implementation. But this is not only to be realized if community-generated and women-led data are treated as legitimate, but also embedded in national reporting systems resourced adequately and connected with global indicator frameworks across the UNEP-WCMC, the UNCBD here, and the UNCCD as well. So in short, building synergies across Rio Conventions requires embracing the full interconnectedness of biodiversity and environmental data systems. It requires centering women's knowledge, indigenous governance, and community evidence as equal pillars of global environmental accountability. And it requires sustained investment from financial, technical, to political investments so that we can ensure gender-responsive data is not an afterthought, but rather a driving force for transformative action. We stand ready to deepen this work with everybody here in front as well as in the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Benga, and I think you actually gave us an answer. And now with Marina, we are going to see how that has been transformed, right? Like one of the biggest challenges, the political uptake. Not only for gender and biodiversity data, we can say just for biodiversity data, right? Like at the IPBES plenary, we have been seeing once and again, you know, like there is a challenge for decision making in general, no, all around the world, to react as quick as possible to the data that is in front. But now, moving on, we are gonna hear from a national government and how when there is will, when there is interest, when there is a lived experience, things can be changed. So I'm inviting now my colleague Marina Lopez from CONAMP, the Protected Areas Commission for Guatemala, but as one of our main champions, Gender and Biodiversity Focal Point. Marina, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Muchas gracias por tu paciencia, por no tener la traducción, por tu solidaridad. Una disculpa contigo, pero muy interesadas en escuchar tu experiencia. She will be speaking in Spanish and then we will have a translation, right? Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Quiero expresarles un cordial saludo desde Guatemala. Estoy muy contenta de poder compartir algunas experiencias, ¿verdad? Y algunas vivencias que tenemos en relación al tema que nos apasiona, que es la igualdad de género. Voy a hablar de datos. ¿Por qué es importante hablar de datos? Si se han dado cuenta, en todas las discusiones y negociaciones que hemos tenido, siempre ha resaltado la necesidad de datos. Con base a la evaluación de medio término del Plan de Acción de Género y los hallazgos que muestran que las mujeres en general, especialmente las de base comunitaria, ya están generando y utilizando datos de biodiversidad sensibles al género, cuya finalidad es apoyar la toma de decisiones a nivel local, la incidencia comunitaria y la acción basada en derechos. Cuando hablamos de derechos, es pertinente introducir en el análisis dos aspectos muy importantes que se relacionan con la soberanía de los datos y el rostro de los datos.
Based on the mid-term review of the Gender Plan of Action and the findings showing that women in general, especially those at community level, are already generating and using gender-sensitive biodiversity data to support decision-making at the local level, community advocacy, and rights-based action. It is pertinent to introduce two important aspects into the analysis: data sovereignty and the face of data.
¿Por qué es importante la soberanía de los datos en diversidad biológica desde el enfoque de género? Vamos a partir porque se refiere al derecho de los estados y comunidades locales a controlar cómo se recopilan, gestionan, usan y comparten los datos de biodiversidad. Por ejemplo, cuando hablamos de ecosistemas, especies, conocimientos tradicionales o ancestrales, es importante que se reconozca que mujeres, hombres y personas diversas interactúan de manera diferenciada con la diversidad biológica y obviamente los datos deben reflejar esas diferencias sin discriminación alguna.
Why is data sovereignty in biological diversity important from a gender perspective? because it refers to the right of states and local communities to control how biodiversity data are collected, managed, used and shared. For example, data on ecosystem, species, and traditional and/or ancestral knowledge. It must be recognized that women, men, and people of diverse identities interact with biodiversity in differentiated ways, and data must reflect these differences without discrimination or exclusion.
La soberanía de los datos cuida para que no se utilicen y se perpetúen la exclusión de las mujeres en proceso de toma de decisiones o justificar acciones ilícitas. El contenido del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica reconoce el rol de las mujeres en la conservación y uso sostenible de la biodiversidad y por ello debe promover la protección de los datos, reconocer, proteger el conocimiento de las mujeres en cuanto a la conservación de semillas, por ejemplo, el uso sostenible de los recursos, la medicina tradicional, la gastronomía, y que ese conocimiento no sea expropiado, explotado, sin el reconocimiento de la distribución justa y equitativa de los beneficios.
Data sovereignty helps prevent data from being used to perpetrate the exclusion of women from decision-making processes or to justify illicit actions. The Convention on Biological Diversity recognizes the role of women in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and therefore must promote data protection, recognize and safeguard women's knowledge related to seed conservation, sustainable resource use, and traditional medicine, and ensure that such knowledge is not appropriated or exploited without recognition or fair and equitable benefit sharing.
Ahora bien, ¿a qué nos referimos cuando hablamos del rostro de los datos? Se debe reconocer que detrás de los datos hay personas con identidades diversas de contextos sociales y culturales que desempeñan diferentes roles, es decir, ahí surge el papel crucial de los datos y nos damos cuenta de que siguen habiendo desigualdades y relaciones de poder que aún ponen en desventaja a las mujeres.
It must be recognized that behind data there are people with diverse identities and social and cultural context who play different roles. This is where the crucial role of data emerges, revealing inequalities and power relationships that still place women at a disadvantage.
Cuando hablamos de datos no se trata únicamente de números o estadísticas, sino más bien de historias humanas que reflejan quiénes producen, usan y se benefician de la información. Desde la perspectiva del rostro de los datos, podemos visibilizar o invisibilizar a ciertos colectivos.
It is not only about the numbers or statistics, but also about human stories that reflect who produces, uses, and benefits from information. From the perspective of the face of data, data can either make certain groups visible or render them invisible.
Otorgarle rostro a los datos implica la necesidad de desagregar por género, edad y comunidad lingüística, que es un caso particular de Guatemala, que es un país mega diverso, lo cual es determinante para la toma de decisiones o también priorizar intervenciones e inversión presupuestaria. Si no se evidencian los datos, se perpetúan las desigualdades e inequidades y se pierden oportunidades de inversión para conocer procesos claves para la protección y conservación, porque la diversidad biológica es un nudo de relaciones sociales. Estamos nosotras también como personas inmersas en ese nudo, no podemos vernos aisladas de ella, nos necesitamos. Por eso quiero cerrar esto diciendo que una nueva humanidad para una nueva tierra necesitamos para reorientar el rumbo de la madre tierra. Muchas gracias.
Giving data a face implies desegregating it by gender, age, and linguistic community, as it is particularly relevant in Guatemala, which is decisive for informed decision-making and for prioritizing intervention and budget allocation. When data is not made visible, inequalities and inequities are perpetuated, and opportunities for investment in understanding key processes for protection and conservation are lost. Biodiversity is a web of social relationships, and humanity is not isolated from it. As I close this statement today, I would like to say, a new humanity is needed for a new Earth, to reorient the path of Mother Earth. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Marina, por esta inspiradora, super inspiradora. I think Marina, she managed to bring that face, as she said, but also the feelings to the data, right? Like it's sometimes when we speak about data, even how we call it, the value chain, like it seems super detached to what we exactly want to talk about, ¿no? Muchas gracias, Marina, porque nos has permitido traer esa parte de los sentimientos, la humanidad, que es debería estar al centro de los datos, ¿no? Muchas veces lo hablamos de una forma o de una posición lejana, pero que al final del día, ¿cuál es el objetivo de por qué estamos hablando de datos? Muchas gracias por ello. And just to share that, please look into Guatemala's work, the gender unit within CONAP. They are doing so much work, methodological guides, capacity building, internships. They are really focused on the intersection and coming from this perspective, the sovereignty of data and another new approach, more a human approach to data, which I think that is transformative. Thank you so much. And now I will pass it to my colleague, Karen Wong Perez, senior, what did I read it in English? Karen Wong Perez, senior researcher at IIED, which is one of my inspirations, idols, and thank you so much for being here, and she will give us the closing remarks.
Thank you, Amelia. Dear friends, colleagues, members of the press, and distinguished delegates, I would like to start by expressing IIED's delight in the collaboration that we have with the Women Caucus as one of the many members that the Women Caucus have. And we are very excited about the next phase of this collaboration. And I will also like to thank all the speakers for all the very inspiring and valuable contributions. We heard about the findings of the global study. We heard about national implementation experiences and the role of data sovereignty and the face of data. We heard about the need to secure data sovereignty. I had already said that. And also from the technical and gender data expertise and the needs for synergies across the Rio conventions. And together, they illustrate very clearly what the convention calls the whole of society approach, which means not only many actors participating, but different forms of knowledge informing gender-responsive biodiversity action. This discussion is highly relevant to the conversations taking place here at SBI-6. We heard yesterday and we read with attention the party and observer submissions on the midterm review of the Gender Plan of Action. And what we saw and we read and what we heard is a consistent message emerging. Gender equality is recognized as essential for implementing the global biodiversity framework, yet many parties face difficulties tracking progress, and there's gaps in gender-responsive data, limited resources, and challenges in national reporting continue to be highlighted once and again. And as was mentioned earlier, the findings we present today, echo many of the challenges raised by parties. But our study and this collaboration also point a way forward. As our study shows, women-led and community organizations are already collecting biodiversity data, often qualitative and grounded in lived experiences, bringing that face of the data. There are interlocking barriers, including the limited recognition, the limited resources and data infrastructure that prevent this knowledge from informing national processes. And as a result, action may be happening on the ground, but it remains invisible in review processes, as was mentioned earlier. At the same time, many women's organizations have expressed readiness to strengthen their data capacities and willingness to collaborate with parties and partners in monitoring and implementation. And this is particularly urgent. The current gender plan of action runs to 2030, and the midterm review already identifies significant gaps in the availability and use of gender-responsive data. Without improving how evidence is generated and recognized now, the Convention risks reaching the end of the plan without being able to clearly demonstrate progress or learn what works. Implementation requires accountability. Accountability requires evidence, and evidence depends on whose knowledge is recognized, as Benje mentioned. Many parties are calling for stronger indicators and improved data systems, but the challenge is not only technical, as it was mentioned earlier as well, but also political and institutional, and it is about recognizing the value of different forms of knowledge and knowledge systems, including qualitative and women and community-led evidence, and whether our processes allow it to inform monitoring and review. When reporting relies only on centrally generated statistics, we see trends, but we do not fully understand how change occurs, why it occurs, or who is affected. A whole-of-society approach to implementation must therefore also become a whole-of-society evidence system. The next phase of the work with the CBD Women Caucus and all its member organizations consists in a peer-to-peer formative process developed collaboratively by the CBD Women Caucus with IIED and many other organizations, responding directly to the needs identified in both the study and information shared by parties through their submissions and interventions during the SBI. This formative process will focus on two priority areas. First, strengthening gender-responsive and ethical biodiversity data practices, including peer learning, responding to strong interest from women's organizations. This will provide learning opportunities on gender-responsive and intersectional analysis across all stages of data practices, including informed consent, data sovereignty, community data ownership, and support to strengthen ethical data management capacities, consistent with human rights-based approaches, particularly when working with women from indigenous peoples and local communities. And second, ensuring that women-led and community-generated evidence are recognized as valid and complementary sources of biodiversity knowledge and can inform national and international monitoring and reporting processes. This includes partnerships that translates local knowledge into policy-relevant formats and pathways for organizations to contribute to NBSAP's implementation and national reports. These actions are not additional reporting burdens. They are tools to help demonstrate real progress toward Target 23 and the broader framework, including the global review. Through its global network and in partnership with its multiple members, the CBD Women's Caucus with IIED and others will support peer learning and collaboration, connecting women's organizations, governments, research institutions, researchers, and community knowledge holders. And we invite you all, and we invite all actors to engage and support the next phase and help translate the whole of society approach into practical collaboration for implementation and review. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, also for encapsulating all what has been discussed in the panel and guiding us through the next stage of this collaboration. And to be honest, I don't know why people keep inviting me to moderate things, because I don't keep the time, never. Like, we are already beyond the time. But I perhaps still want to ask if there is any question that you would like to ask, any follow-up clarification. Yes, please, Ruth.
And we have to do it over. Many times, doing it over means I have to do it because they don't know. But I think we have reached the stage where we have to be really bold and tell our governments that they are leaving out key information on many of our groups. If we don't do it, they're going to continue to do it. And, you know, it keeps the people down. But one of my solutions is building partnerships, because when I come to meetings, I build partnerships. Somebody agrees to publish a case study, and then the government back home is reading, you know? So we have to take strong action. We can't continue this anymore, because the people will continue to be left down, and wrong information is going to go. Let's get the evidence out, the evidence that there's local action meeting a lot of these targets and goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth, also for these remarks, which are actually one of the inspirations for these collaborations, now looking into the local actors and making them visible. Just want to know if there is any other intervention, remark, question that people from the audience. We are really grateful for your patience and for you to be in here. Yes, Meryl, please.
Thank you. I'm Meryl from the Forest and Finance Coalition. So we do a lot of campaigning on banks to make them stop financing deforestation. And one of the things banks always complain about is the lack of data to measure biodiversity impacts. So I was wondering, to what extent could this gender-responsive data also be helpful for banks to take more conscious decisions about what they finance and what they don't finance?
That is a great question. I will perhaps give a bit of time to the panel. Is there any other question, Anna? So we can take both together. So
maybe in line, I was going to ask, what would be your main ask to donors, considering the role that they can play, both ODA and philanthropic sources, in supporting gender justice in biodiversity data and policy? So if maybe one of you can respond due to time constraints.
Muchas gracias, Ana. And just to share with Marina the two questions, Marina, in case you want to address them. One is Meryl from Finance Coalition. ¿Por qué te estaba hablando en inglés y español? Meryl pregunta si estos datos que se están recogiendo ya sobre género y biodiversidad podrían también contribuir a la toma de decisiones de bancos. O sea, muchas veces las instituciones financieras quieren entender los impactos en la biodiversidad. Entonces, pregunta si ya se considera esa información. Y Ana preguntaba también, en un sentido similar, cuál es la aproximación o cuáles las reflexiones o tal vez como retroalimentación que hemos recibido de funders, de financiadores, para el tema de género y biodiversidad. Sí, justo por el tiempo quizá demos la oportunidad solo a responder una pregunta, pero pensala, si quieres pensala y vamos. Let's give the chance for each of you to try to 30 seconds, try to address, if you wish to, just open the mic, whoever wants to.
Well, for the next stage of the collaboration, our intention is to start a formative process, and as part of that formative process is to launch a call for case studies. As you heard, most of the women's organizations are collecting qualitative data that can complement quantitative data. One of the questions that we have is what will be the shape of the formative process? It will be focused on quantitative, qualitative, but in parallel, the launch of the call for the case studies will try to address some of the knowledge gaps, and hopefully those case studies will be relevant for financial institutions to take on board. But I think this raises a good idea, like how to build bridges, not only to carve that pathway for COP17 and the global review, but other actors that also are part of the whole of society approach. So I think it's a good start to build these bridges on data needs and data data providers. And the same case for funders, I guess, is my response.
Right. Very quickly, I think in part response to the second question, many statistical systems sort of underrate qualitative data systems. And I think with that, we normally face challenges in supporting the collection, use, analysis of qualitative data. But I think this is an opportunity for national statistical systems, especially, because those are the ones that also feed into the global accountability and measurement systems, to recognize the power that qualitative data can actually provide. Because I think in addition to the point that Karen made about how it reinforces quantitative data, qualitative data can also help correct what quantitative data systems are saying or missing. So we need to make sure that we recognize this existing amount of data and information that is being provided through narratives, stories, and others, that they can actually play an important role in more formal and recognized data systems. And that's how channeling of resources can also be done in a more effective fashion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benge. And I think Marina, she has a perspective. Yes.
Sí, el reconocimiento de los datos sí existe. El problema es que no lo quieren reconocer como fuente primaria de información. O sea, les interesa porque hay muchísima información, mucha producción, pero no necesariamente para devolverlo con distribución justa y equitativa, sino que para apropiarse. Por eso yo resaltaba esa parte, que si no cuidamos, no le damos esa soberanía, ese derecho de protección de los datos, estaríamos también provocando discriminación o perpetuando la discriminación y la exclusión, porque los generadores de datos, principalmente en las comunidades, sí que se deben proteger para evitar que ocurra lo que llamamos biopiratería, por ejemplo.
Okay. The acknowledgement of that does exist, however, the problem is the government doesn't recognize that as the primary source and doesn't interest it for their like sources of spending, and they don't return the favor to them. And if we don't give sovereignty to the protection, we will be perpetrating the discrimination and exclusion of data.
Y esa es la lucha. Esa es la lucha que tenemos constantemente para que se protejan los datos. Ya no queremos que vengan personas y se lleven la información, la riqueza de producción que se hace en Guatemala, en las comunidades, que son las mujeres las poseedoras de esos conocimientos, pero se lo llevan. ¿Por qué? Porque no hay derecho de protección. ¿Sí?
That is the constant fight that they are having to protect the data. However, they are working so people don't steal the data, as there is multiple inequalities for the women.
Resumen.
Thank you so much to Marina and to Ima as well for the interpretation. Thank you so much. And just looking at the panel, is there any other thought that you would like to share before closing? No. Okay. So we thank you all. Thank as well as to the panel. You have the QR code for the report. Kindly read it, kindly share it around, and keep an eye on the caucus, on the IIED social media, as we will be sharing more information of this second phase for the peer-to-peer engagement. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot. Thank you.